Welcome back to the Sean S. Show. Today, New Yorkers are headed to the polls to vote for their primary candidates. And in a new process of ranked choice voting, we're going to be talking about all the candidates who are on the ballot, their policy positions, fundraising numbers, and more. Today, June 22nd, 2021. From Anchor by Spotify, this is the Sean S. Show. With me, your host, Ishan. Welcome back to the Ishan S. Show. Thank you for coming back. Last week, there were a series of technical issues that I was facing when trying to post last Friday's episode, which is why I postponed it to Saturday and then just canceled it altogether. So I apologize for any issues that may have caused. Now, without any further ado, let's get on to today's episode topic. So today is June 22nd for most people, and that's just the 22nd day or June or birthday or whatever else. But for the people of New York City, today's actually a big day. Today is primary election day in New York City, and voters from all over the city are headed to the polls to vote in their respective party primaries. Today, we're just going to be talking about the Democratic primary and the Democratic candidates, not because of any bias of mine or anything. Rather, just because in New York City, these past few years, it's become harder and harder to win elections as a Republican. And this year, I don't expect New Yorkers to elect a Republican mayor. An election of a Republican mayor in New York City is like an election of a Democrat governor in West Virginia. They've done it before and not too long ago, but now it's simply not a realistic possibility. With all that said, I should point out that New York City has had some pretty notable Republican mayors, including Rudy Giuliani, who many of you know as a member of former President Donald Trump's personal legal team. He was mayor during 9/11, and ex-2020 Democratic presidential primary candidate Michael Bloomberg, who was initially a Democrat, then became a Republican in time for his election, then became an independent, and then switched back to the Democratic Party. He was faced with a lot of criticism for his policies as mayor. So a quick background of the election. Incumbent Democratic Mayor Bill de Blasio, who also ran for president in 2020, is currently ineligible to run for a third term in office due to term limits in New York City. So this year's Democratic primary is a race to replace de Blasio. And this year's field is much bigger than normal primary fields in local politics, and there are several candidates who have never held political office before, but they've gained a lot of traction. Before I move on to those candidates, however, I think it's worth mentioning that this year's primary will be the first time ranked choice voting has been implemented in an NYC mayoral election. For those who don't know, ranked choice voting, like the name implies, allows voters to rank their preferred candidates to a certain limit, in this case, the top 5 candidates. And through a moderately long process, candidates who do the worst are eliminated from the race, and their votes are then reapportioned based on the second, third, fourth, or fifth choice on the ballot that the voter may have marked. This is something that's not as common in our country, but it's becoming more widely used in several locations across the United States. The state of Maine used it in the 2020 election. Alaska's adopting it for their midterm election. Cities in states like California, Florida, Colorado, Michigan, and Minnesota, and others have also used it. So other than the candidates themselves, today, ranked choice voting is also making its own headlines today in New York City. Now, I know for a fact that most of my listeners are not New Yorkers, and many of you might be wondering why it is that I'm even covering a race like this. While many of us don't really care about what someone is going to do as mayor of New York City, or the policies don't really affect us, I think what really matters is that the position of NYC mayor is a big profile booster. It builds for you a lot of credibility. And in this case, it's not just in New York City. This is also relevant in other big cities like Houston, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, etc. Whoever becomes the Democratic nominee today or within the next few weeks and will very likely become the mayor of New York. And this is someone who will have a lot of people watching them for their political future. People are probably going to look for a potential run for governor, a U.S. Senate, get selected to a cabinet post. That happens a lot, actually. Even in Biden's administration, off the top of my head, I at least know 2 cabinet secretaries who have been former mayors. Marty Walsh, who's the Secretary of Labor, I believe, and Pete Buttigieg, who is the Secretary of Transportation. And while a long shot, these people can even run for president. Look at Julian Castro. He was the mayor of Houston. He was a cabinet secretary too, but he also ran for president in 2020. So people can run for president. They have a future ahead of being mayor of, a moderately sized city, and being the mayor of the biggest city in the country, where the number of voters exceeds the number of voters in certain states, builds you a lot of credibility. People do have a lot of interest in your political future. Rudy Giuliani, who I mentioned earlier, even ran for the 2000 Republican Party nomination for U.S. Senate, and he was seen as a front runner throughout his whole campaign. It was just his last 4 weeks that kind of turned south for him, but those were for other reasons, for various scandals. But in that time, when Hillary Clinton was set to be the Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate for New York, Rudy Giuliani was the best person many people saw as the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate from New York. He did drop out, and Hillary Clinton did win that seat ultimately. Okay, so now that we know the implications of becoming mayor of NYC, and we have a baseline understanding of ranked choice voting, now let's take a look at the Democratic candidates who voters are ranking in today's primary. So some of these names are familiar, and many of them have been in New York politics for a while now. So let's start from the top in alphabetical order. So to start off, Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams is on the ballot today. He's been in New York politics for a while now. He served in the New York City Transit Police, then the New York City Police Department. After that, he retired from the NYPD and served in the New York State Senate from 2006 to 2013. After which, he was elected to his current post as Brooklyn Borough President. Adams has faced some questions about his residency in New York, which I won't get into for the purposes of time. He also received a slew of endorsements on the federal, state, and local levels. As of today, Adams is polling the highest amongst the pack, with numbers between 25 to 30%. Sean Donovan is running today. His career has spanned from serving in the White House to also serving in New York City government. He served as U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in the Obama administration from 2009 to 2014. And then after that, he was moved over to become the director of the U.S. Office of Management and Budget for the remainder of the Obama years. Before that, he also served as the commissioner of the New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development from 2004 to 2009, while Michael Bloomberg was mayor. He was one of the first people to announce their candidacy, but so far he's had a pretty poor showing and has been ranked in the bottom half of primary polling, sitting at less than 10% for most of the campaign season. Another New York City politics veteran, Catherine Garcia, is on the ballot. She served as New York City Sanitation Department Commissioner from 2014 to 2020, and previously served as the CEO of the New York City Housing Authority. And she was also appointed as New York City's food czar during the COVID-19 pandemic and New York's emergency food program. Garcia has been endorsed by several state legislators, a few organizations, labor unions, and newspapers like the New York Daily News and the New York Times, who said that in their endorsement, they said that she was the, quote, most qualified candidate. She is currently polling at third place, and of all the candidates, I think she's probably had the biggest increase in support amongst any other candidate, because if you look at the left end of the chart, so the beginning, she had about 5%. And now I think she's at like 17%, sitting at third place. That's probably the biggest rise I've seen for any of the candidates in this race. The next three candidates, who are Raymond McGuire, a city executive, Diane Morales, another New York City official, and Scott Stringer, another New York State official and New York City official, are all low to mid-tier candidates, and therefore won't have much of an impact on the race in terms of like them winning. Of these three, Scott Stringer polled the highest, but his support promptly dropped following accusations of inappropriate behavior by two women, which hurt his overall standing in the campaign. And if you look at the number of endorsements he had, most of them have been crossed out following those allegations. So that really hurt his standing in the campaign. Next on the list is Maya Wiley. She's probably one of the more well-known people on this list. She served as counsel to Mayor de Blasio, and she chaired a civilian complaint review board. And I think where most people have seen her is probably her work on MSNBC as a legal analyst since 2018. Willie has seen endorsements from major progressives in the Democratic Party like Julian Castro, who I mentioned earlier, and Elizabeth Warren and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Willie has always been seen as a frontrunner in this race, and she currently sits at second place just behind Adams, with polls having her just above 20%. And then to round off our list, the final person I'm talking about today is Andrew Yang. Many of us recognize Yang's name from the 2020 Democratic presidential primary. Now, unlike most other little-known candidates in that race, such as Marianne Williamson and John Delaney, Yang managed to really make a name for himself, and he was very popular amongst the Democratic base, mainly for his liberal policies, and most notably of which was probably his universal basic income policy. Now, he suspended his presidential campaign following a poor showing in the New Hampshire primary, and then quickly joined CNN as a political analyst. Before all of that, he had been a business person and has founded several nonprofit organizations. I think what's going for Yang is really his name recognition from the 2020 campaign. If it wasn't for that, he'd probably be in that nobody section that I mentioned earlier, and I don't think he would have had any shot at winning. He started off in the campaign as an early frontrunner and the prospective winner, but his support has since dwindled ever since Eric Adams and Maya Wiley have come out as frontrunners in this race. He currently sits at fourth place with about 12 to 13% of this vote, closing off the group of top-tier candidates. That was a look at the candidates in today's election. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this short break to talk about where the race actually stands and who's set to be declared the winner. Okay, so we're back from our break. Now, as I said, today's Democratic primary is the real contest for mayor of New York City. The Republican Party is also there, but whoever the Republican nominee is just simply doesn't have a shot at winning the mayor's office for the reasons I mentioned earlier in the episode. In the 2020 election, President Biden won New York City with anywhere from 55 to 85% of the vote, depending on the borough and county. In 2017, de Blasio won his re-election campaign with 65% of the vote, and Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, won New York City with margins similar to Biden's. Overall, it's clear that New York City is blue. It's very blue, very Democratic. Now, of the 8 or so candidates that I talked about earlier, I think you could all tell that I did have my eye on really 4 main candidates, and those are the real candidates who I feel like have a real shot at winning today, and they comprise of the top tier candidates, which include Eric Adams, Maya Wiley, Catherine Garcia, and Andrew Yang. All the others shouldn't be too hopeful, but they get an E for effort from me. But they shouldn't be too hopeful about winning today. In some wide, crazy scenario that they somehow win through the ranked choice voting and all else fails, then yes, I may be wrong. But I'm going to place my money on these 4 candidates, one of them winning, just because they're far more popular, more people know them, So the real question isn't about Democrat versus Republican. Mainly, it's rather just more of a fight between Democrats themselves. And what better thing to talk about than the signature internal Democratic fight, which is progressives versus moderates. The biggest rift is probably between the highest polling candidates, Eric Adams and Maya Wiley. These two are pretty. They're pretty much opposites on this spectrum. Eric Adams is the more moderate candidate, while Willie, as you could tell from her endorsements, is the more progressive candidate in the race. So our top two candidates clash a lot. In their mayoral debates, they have clashed with one another on several issues, including reinstating New York City's controversial stop and frisk policy and slashing funding for the NYPD after the killing of George Floyd last year. So Maya Wiley is the only one of the top four who actually supports these cuts, while Garcia, Yang, and Adams all oppose any cuts to the NYPD. Now, another thing that has candidates' attention were constituent priorities. As is with any campaign, you must understand what your voters want to be, what they want addressed. And that's an easy thing to figure out, believe it or not, at a state or federal level. But with such a wide assortment of candidates, figuring that out on a local level is far more difficult. Now, I say that mainly because New York City is such a large city and faces far more problems and issues than the textbook issues you'd come across on a wider scale. Like, for a presidential primary, what are you talking about in the Democratic Party? You're talking about healthcare, immigration, the economy. That's it. Or in state politics, you'll talk about, I don't know, if you're in an agricultural state, talk about agriculture, the economy, and, again, maybe immigration. I don't know. But generally, the issues that need to be addressed are those textbook issues that everybody knows about, and everybody expects you to just talk about that stuff. In more local races, the issues that voters face and that candidates face are far more different and can change very quickly. And that is because local government has a big effect on our day-to-day lives. So the topics that they have to address are probably going to be a lot more specific than you'd see at wider scales. Now, according to NPR, in this year's elections, voters seem to care most about public safety. Now, with crime soaring high in New York City and differing views on interactions with law enforcement, many voters seem to have this topic right at the top of their minds as they head to the polls today. Now, in the area of fundraising, an important factor in all elections, it seems that Andrew Yang has the lead in the pact, according to Politico, with the largest number of individual contributors to a campaign, while Adams has the second largest fundraising operation. So, and he has a lot of money. So that kind of, when you look at that, it shows that Andrew Yang, Eric Adams, again, those top tier of candidates have a lot of money, have a lot of good campaign operations. The people who are also on that list, believe it or not, many of the insignificant candidates who I mentioned earlier are actually higher up on that list compared to Willie and Garcia. The Citigroup guy, McGuire, he has, I think, $11 million in funding. I think Morales is right behind Andrew Yang in terms of cash on hand. And then Stringer is also in that list at the middle level of fundraising. But, these three candidates, again, you might have the money, but if you don't have the name recognition or if you don't have the policies that are specific to you and you don't resonate with the voters, you still don't have a shot at winning. So Eric Adams and Andrew Yang standing at the top there, again, further point to that indication of who the real race is between. But we can't really discount that out from everybody, because Willie and Garcia are at the bottom of the list, but they still have pretty decent numbers. Now, with ranked choice voting in place today, it's not just a fight of getting your base to come out to vote. Now candidates need to either get an outright 50% plus one majority, or the more likely situation, they need to get the support of people from multiple camps. What that means is you may get as many people from your base to come out and vote for you. But if your base is just 25% of the electorate, you got to figure out how to get 50%. So you might go to candidate B to get maybe 10% of their voters, 7% of candidate C. You have to build support in multiple camps so that you can get that second choice vote or second choice rank, so that people can, their votes, should their candidate get eliminated, go to you, right? So this was seen over the weekend when Andrew Yang and Catherine Garcia campaigned together. This was in an effort to boost their chances of getting support from each other's bases. Eric Adams did criticize Yang and Garcia for doing what they did, but as of today, he's been walking back on those complaints. Now, in all of this, the incumbent mayor, Bill de Blasio, has not officially issued an endorsement of any particular candidate in this race, and has instead stayed quiet on that front. This is something that most incumbents do. However, the New York Times is reporting that de Blasio, who is a staunch progressive, is said to be in support of Eric Adams. So that's a look at the race. Now, who do I think is going to win today? So look, this is a prediction that's based off of numbers, policies, and what my gut tells me. In the beginning of the year, I think in February, I was pretty confident that purely off of name recognition that Andrew Yang was going to win today's election. But I think his story since then has proven to be a cautionary tale, one that of the people or ranks of Beto O'Rourke and others, which is that you can cash in all of your political efforts solely off of the fact that you were, moderately successful in a previous election. In Yang's case, that was the 2020 Democratic primary. You need to establish yourself further as a mayoral, in this case, you need to establish yourself further as a mayoral candidate, right? So, it's not that Yang hasn't been doing it. To Yang's credit, he has been trying very hard in these past few weeks to do that, and he's been trying hard. But I don't think my prediction for Yang victory stands anymore. I won't count him out, but I think the person who I have been shifting my focus towards is Eric Adams. I think in all the polls and his policies, it's pretty evident that he resonates with most New Yorkers. And he's a pretty popular choice, pretty popular second choice on most people's ballots. If you have Yang or Garcia or Willie, most people also have Adams in their second choice rank too. Likewise, Maya Willie and Catherine Garcia, while they don't have much support overall, they're probably going to bet most of their success on being voters' second choice candidate. So in summary, I think Adams is going to win today, or whenever. And with Yang and Garcia and Willie all having a shot at victory, if the ranked choice voting thing starts to get into play a lot. We have multiple recount, with the ranked choice voting, more reapportionment and that stuff. So I would point out that we will not know who the winner is, however, for a few weeks or days. This is because no candidate is expected to garner 50% of support in the first ballot. So reapportionment will happen, and mail ballots and ballots that come in after Election Day also need to be counted. And I believe in New York, there's a rule that those votes will not be counted until after Election Day. So depending on how many there are, that may also increase the amount of time we have to wait. So while I have in mind a top 4, the real winner is probably going to need to wait a while. Now, before I let you guys go, I'd like to make an announcement about the direction that I will be taking this show towards. What I mean is that when I started this show, it was my intention to keep it as a neutral-based news show in which I reported political news and provided some analysis. As I've been making more and more episodes, it's becoming more and more clear to me that political news per se is not as interesting of a topic to cover, nor is it as plentiful of a topic to cover. We don't get that many stories in terms of political news. So that is why I've decided to refocus my show into more of a talk show in which I still discuss elements of political news, but not exclusively. I'll probably cover election stories, specific issues, and topics, etc. I'd like to make it clear, though, that I will still cover the news from time to time, but not as much as I had initially planned on doing so. Thank you so much for your support thus far, and please continue to support the show by listening to new episodes, following us on our Instagram and our Twitter soon. That does it for us today. If you liked today's episode and analysis, then share it with your friends and family. It really helps out. Follow our Instagram at The Ishan S Show for breaking news and updates about the show. And stay tuned for Friday's episode. This is The Ishan S Show. Thank you for joining us. I'll see you on Friday. Bye.